Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another lecture in the series of the Baha'i lecture series of Haifa University. Today's lecturer is a distinguished scholar, Negar Mottahedeh. Dr. Negar Mottahedeh is an assistant professor of literature and women's studies. She received her PhD from the Department of Cultural Studies and Comparative Literature at the University of Minnesota in 1998. In 2008, Duke University Press published her book on post-revolutionary Iranian cinema entitled Displaced Allegories. Her first book, Representing the Unrepresentable, was published in 2008 by Syracuse University Press. 2008 must be in a very pressed year for you.
Yes,
And
I'm trying to flood the market.
Yes. She has, a part of these two books, numerous articles in journals, edited volumes, in collections, book reviews, and other, which I cannot, because of the length of the publication, go through. I would say, just mention few of those articles. Karbala Drag Kings and Queens, published in Drama Review in 2005. The New Iranian Cinema, Traditions in World Cinema, edited by Bodley and Schneider and Palmer in Edinburgh University Press in 2006. And Woman is Color on Mohsen Makhmalbaf's Gabe, Cines del Sur, International Film Festival book 2008. As I said, 2008 was very blessed one. And that today's title of her lecture would be Where the Future Nest, 19th Century Babi and Bahai Photography, which is, I think, those who are involved in Baha'i studies would say that is a totally new area, which is a very promising one. So we are looking forward to your presentation. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Shafar. Thank you so much. And thank you also, Dr. Mahmoudi, for the kind invitation and for bringing me here. It's a real pleasure and a true honor to be here. If you're expecting a whole lot of photographs, Babi and Bahai photographs, you'll be sorely disappointed. I managed to do a reading of a few, and then that was it. I think that the length of time that we have, I'll only be able to focus on a few, and you'll see why. So, there is in circulation one photograph, this one, that is purportedly a photograph of Qurratul Ain Tahireh, the poet, whose famous unveiled appearance in a garden before an assembly of some 80 men is remembered by Sheikh Abu Turab in the Babi Chronicle Nabil's narrative as an act that marked the final blow to worldly and otherworldly laws, and led one man in the audience to cut his own throat in horror, leaving her presence covered in blood. While it is unlikely that this photograph is of the poet herself, the garden scene, as it is recorded in Abu Turab's memory, is photographic by nature. Now, whatever its accuracy, Abu Turab's recollection of that day draws its strength from an ancient story said to have been told by God himself to the tired and weary followers of the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. The story is referred to by the title The Best of Stories, which is the story of the Prophet Yusuf. The story goes that Yusuf, or Joseph, was a pure and comely man who was brought into the household of the Egyptian Al-Aziz as both servant and adopted son. The wife of Al-Aziz fell in love with him and tried to seduce him. Yusuf, pure as he was, rejected her advances. The women of the town, predictably, began to talk, and about Al-Aziz's wife and her desire for the servant of the household. Okay, I'm learning not Mac. What happens next in the story in the Quran? I will quote directly from the Quran. When the wife of Al-Aziz heard of their malicious talk, the townswomen's talk, she sent for them and prepared a banquet for them. She gave each of them a knife, and Thomas Mann says those were very, very tiny, sharp knives indeed. And she said to Yusuf, "Come out before them." When they saw him, they did extol him, and in their amazement they cut their hands. They said, "God preserve us, no mortal is this. This is none other than a noble angel." Though dramatic in form, the story of the poet Qurratul Ain Tahireh comes together by an appeal to this archaic image preserved in lacquer and mural paintings representing the townswomen's banquet sequence from the best of stories. The banquet scene is the most energetically reproduced sequence of the Surah 12 of the Quran. Using the Quranic tale of Yusuf as if it were a photographic cliché, much like a photographic negative from which multiple prints can be made, Abu Turab's recollection of the events in the garden, especially the cutting of the throat, develops a latent detail buried within the story. In the process, Abu Turab transforms the story into an infinitely reproducible image. Details of structure are, Walter Benjamin writes, more native to the camera than the atmospheric landscape or soulful portrait. Yet at the same time, photography reveals in its material physiognomic aspect image worlds which dwell in the smallest things, meaningful yet covert enough to find a hiding place in waking dreams, but which enlarged and capable of formulation make the difference between technology and magic visible as a thoroughly historical variable. A transformation such as the one developed from the Quranic detail and rendered into movement like a photo booklet with pictures which filtered by the onlooker under the pressure of the thumb, once thought a product of magic, reveals itself as a technological possibility. In Abu Turab's rendering of the detail, Qurratul Ain Tahireh stands in as the comely Yusuf, except she is a woman. While Yusuf is ordered into the assembly of women, Tahireh, as pure and as chaste as Yusuf, and as beautifully bejeweled, brings herself to the assembly of men. Yusuf's handsomeness is so striking that it holds the assembled women riveted. Theirs is a spontaneous physical response, namely bleeding. Qurratul Ain's appearance leads to a scene of crimson horror. The transformed archaic image of the Prophet Yusuf's matchless beauty works as a latent detail in Nabil's narrative to constitute continuity with the religions of the past and at once deliver the decisive break with the past in a prophecy of a future that has in fact arrived, unperturbed, unveiled, and uninhibited in the embodied figure of a pure and beautiful woman without equal. Okay, well, maybe we should go back. In Abu Turab's memory, Yusuf reappeared as a cliché, a photographic negative that is progressively developed and fixed in modern consciousness. The pure and handsome male prophet, an archaic negative, now appears transformed into a portrait, a photographic positive of Tahireh, the pure one. Her very presence in the assemblage of men calls for the severance of the present from all past time, while securing the Babi moment's continuity and legitimacy with religious history through the reappearance of the figure of the Holy Yusuf. Abu Turab's recollection of Qurratul Ain's appearance signals the potentiality of new visual technologies to capture the now in its fullness, so that we, looking back, can discover it anew. His recollection of Badash recognizes in the image a potential that his era could only begin to surmise. Divided into 4 sections, this paper asks a very simple question: what does a photograph capture? 2 other questions take shape after considering this first one. What are the afterlives of photography? And what are the impacts of photography on the production of knowledge and culture? Such questions are anticipated in the ways that photography was historically employed not only to copy reality, but to explore publicly the intimacy of the private. As Roland Barthes observes, the age of photography corresponds precisely to the explosion of the private into the public, or rather into the creation of a new social value, which is the publicity of the private. This historical role of the photograph, the social value to which Barthes refers, has receded. The historical value has receded as social media networks such as Facebook and Twitter have become the sites of miniaturized exchanges of that which is considered private. Jean Baudrillard would have called these a succession of instants, a distillation that is at once ephemeral and lasting. Though we often believe it to be otherwise, photography has never been a copy of reality. As Barthes also emphasized, photography is an emanation of the past reality, a magic, not an art. As such, the photograph is an anti-disciplinary object which can be used to mesmerize and entertain and attract, or stigmatize, frighten, and repel. But it is subversive, it is anti-disciplinary only to the extent that it is pensive, only to the extent that it thinks. What I'm asking us to notice is that there is more to the photograph than meets the eye. What we don't instantly see, for example in this scene, what is unpresentable in the indexical present, in the moment that is happening of the photograph, is that magical element that suddenly reveals itself in the moment of redemption, in a moment after, often long after the moment's encounter with the lens of the camera. Here we suddenly see that there are lots of dogs. The first part of this presentation is historical and traces the trajectory of the camera in Iran in the production of public representations of power. The second section introduces 3 specific cases of this cultural transformation of power through photography. We will look at the case of Mirza Reza Kermani, Nasiruddin Shah's assassin, the case of Monsieur Naus, the Belgian Minister of Customs in Iran, and the case of Mirza Badi, a Babi and a state criminal. The third section deals with the way buried and unconscious meanings were brought to consciousness through photography in Iran. Here I show how the camera in the hand of Nasiruddin Shah, a camera immersed in the realm of the forbidden, or the haram, crossed and blurred the traditional boundaries between public or exterior realms and the private and interior realm of Iranian culture. The camera recovered in this way a repressed otherness in the realm of everyday life, something that is hidden, something unpresentable, which Walter Benjamin reads in light of the recovery of the unconscious in psychoanalysis. And he defines this, and this defines my reference to that latent or buried entity in photography. Thus, in section 4 of this talk, and my return to Mirza Badi and Abdul Baha's reading of this, demonstrates how this recovery of everyday unconscious life through photography is productive of new social meanings. It is in the photograph that we find that indiscernible place in the condition of the long past minute, where the future is nesting so eloquently that we, looking back, can discover it. The first reference to the use of photography in Iran is by the Frenchman Jules Richard, who writes in 1844 about receiving an invitation to photograph the young Crown Prince Nasiruddin in Tabriz. He writes, "I had an audience with the Crown Prince. in order to take his photograph on silver plates. 2 sets of equipment using metal plates have been brought for the Shah. One is a gift from the Queen of England, the other from the Emperor of Russia. In the early 1850s and 60s, Nasiruddin Shah himself developed a genuine interest in photography, and this inspired his courtiers to take up the art. The Shah sent one of his favorite valets, Agha Reza, to the Polytechnique Darul Funun after its establishment in 1852. The Shah then appointed him Akasbashi, or court photographer, and some years later, Nasiruddin Shah himself took up photography and amassed a collection that now comprises of 20,000 photographs of all kinds held in the Shah's old palace. Among these are a series of images of Europe's reigning families and an assortment of photographs of women in the imperial harem. The photographs include souvenirs of visits by the Shah to various Persian cities, as well as images of the country's leading personalities. The notes accompanying the Shah's photographs show that he was familiar with scientific developments and technical procedures, and that he worked himself with various apparatuses. One of the earliest photographs taken by Nasiruddin Shah himself is a self-portrait taken in 1865. In a profile shot in front of the port, he stands in the idealized studio style of Nadar, wearing a combination of European and Persian clothes. And you'll see that he is taking a studio photograph outside. He's wearing a top hat, an elaborate necktie, a European overcoat, and checkered trousers. Another of Nasiruddin Shah's early portraits is of his mother, the Mahd-ul-Ya, which shows the powerful harem manager seated on an ornate chair with her hands clasped. She is modestly dressed in all her finery, with emphasis on the lavish material textures and precise disposition of draperies. Foreign photographers such as Antoine Sevruguin were among the first commercial photographers in Iran. Sevruguin produced a wide variety of photographs that were used to illustrate travel books and narratives from 1880 to 1930. His pictures capture rare stage scenes from the lives of Persian women outside of the more common studio settings where light could be controlled. His collection included portraits of religious figures and moments from traditional methods of punishment and justice. One of Sevruguin's photographs fixes the scene of Mirza Reza Kermani's public execution. Another is a portrait of the same man, a disheveled, unruly subject who is confined by massive chains. It is claimed that such photographs of state criminals were circulated initially in the 19th century Iranian culture to warn and discipline the dynastic subjects. Evidently, this last photograph was of Mirza Reza was mass-produced as a postcard in the 1910s, bearing the caption, "The late blessed Mirza Reza, who martyred the late blessed Nasiruddin Shah. May God purify his tomb." While the photograph itself was intended as a warning, as a disciplinary measure for the population, this dual homage to both assassin and victim read into the photograph the remorseful ambivalence of the post-constitutional period. The image and text combine to elevate the assassin to the status of a precursor to the constitutional revolution of 1909, and the Shah as a sacrifice to the emergence of the revolution itself. Although the reign of Nasiruddin Shah was long over by the time of the constitutional revolution, the homage is not an entirely inaccurate assessment of the Shah's role as a photo collector of everyday life. The homage articulates the dynast's important role as the first promoter of mass photography in public life, a role which came to be significant in the public expression of private opinions in the decades that followed. The public circulation of this private photograph of the Belgian minister Monsieur Naus wearing a clerical garb, so he's sitting right there, is perhaps the best example of how 19th century photography made the realm of the private accessible to the masses and thus brought the private into close public scrutiny. Monsieur Naus was the Belgian Minister of Customs in Iran under Nasiruddin Shah. Under his auspices, the auspices of the Shah, Naus introduced several tax reforms in the 1890s that reduced the profit margin of local merchants and made their goods less competitive in the local market. Immediately before the Constitutional Revolution, the fear of economic loss helped create a coalition between merchants, clerics, and landowners who together began to criticize the privileges and protections accorded to European merchants in Iran. They called for the dismissal of the Belgian minister and argued for new laws that would protect and represent the people. Now, this photograph of a private party for foreign representatives in Iran entered the public sphere at this point to express the national will for change. It was appropriated in the early days of protests that led up to the Constitutional Revolution and was distributed as a flyer by local merchants protecting the Belgian minister's tax reforms. The private photograph of the minister's costume party, which made a mockery of Iranian traditions, became a symbolic metaphor for the desire of political independence and democracy in Iran. The Naus photograph entered into the public sphere to articulate a desire for national independence from foreign powers and a demand for economic prosperity for the nation at large. It served as a foundation for an oppositional public sphere between the rising middle classes and the dynast himself. Briefly stated, upon entering the public sphere, the photographic meaning shifted from an iconic representation of royal power, namely siyasat, to a symbol of royal despotism. As Mohammad Tawakkoli Tarqi notes, the public display of royal authority was selective, sudden, and swift. It was often publicized in the form of mutilated bodies bearing witness to royal wrath. Manifested upon bodies as a political signature, the afflictive royal authority was conceptualized as siyasat, the right to punish and to shed the blood of transgressive subjects. The mass appropriation of the Naus photograph voiced the nationalist resignification of siyasat as politics and marked the displacement of royal despotism with popular and national sovereignty. An Iranian chronicle written by Abdul Baha in the late 1880s and published in English by the Orientalist Edward Granville Brown under the title A Traveler's Narrative illustrates the resignification of siyasat through a subtle commentary made by the author Abdul Baha. And this is a commentary on another disciplining photograph. In one chapter of this chronicle, he traces the peregrinations of a young Persian man from the borders of Europe and the Ottoman Empire to the court of Nasiruddin Shah. A traveler's narrative tells us that the young man is bearing a letter written by a nobleman and a reformer surnamed Baha'u'llah, who was exiled in Adrianople. The letter, the narrator tells us, addresses issues of state and politics and expresses the exiled nobleman's good intentions and loyalty to Nasiruddin Shah. The young man, whose name is given as Mirza Badi, is chosen to deliver the letter to the Shah, who is stationed outside of Tehran. Mirza Badi waits at a distance on a rock outside of the royal pavilion until he is summoned. The narrative inscribes a precious moment of encounter between the telescopically mediated gaze of the Dain as he's looking out and surveying the fields, and he sees the emaciated body of this enfeebled spirit of the nation's other. Mirza Badi, aware of his ultimate sacrifice, receives permission to approach the royal pavilion with a letter. Badi's dispatch is, according to a traveler's narrative, delivered with dignity, composure, and respectfulness, surpassing description. The Shah commands then to take the letter and arrest the bearer. The narrative claims that the Shah's intentions were to deliberate on the matters raised in the letter. Shocked at this gesture of almost uncritical acceptance, others in the Shah's company are said to have reacted with reprehension. As a result, the young Mirza Badi is ordered by the Shah's ministers to suffer punishment and torture for his presumptuous approach to the court. The spectacle of his mutilated body is to be made into a disciplinary measure, like so many others under Nasruddin Shah's rule, ostensibly for the edification of the masses. These are the words of a traveler's narrative. As the first torment, they applied the chain and rack, saying, "Make known thy other friends, that thou mayest be delivered from excruciating punishment, and make thy comrades captive, that thou mayest escape from the torment of the chain and the keenness of the sword." They spoke really fancy English at the time. But torture, brand, and torment him as they might, they saw naught but steadfastness and silence, and found naught but dumb endurance on his part. So when torture gave no result, they first photographed him, the executioner on his left and on his right, and he sitting bound in fetters and chains beneath the sword with perfect meekness and composure, and then slew and destroyed him. The anonymous author of the narrative at the time then writes that he sent for the photograph and found it worthy of contemplation. For Mirza Badi was seated with wonderful humility and strange submissiveness in utmost resignation. Here at the moment of his death, a photograph is taken of this meek body, a copy of which is acquired by the traveler, whose eyes for the first time rest upon the body of one condemned by the Shah's siyasat. This photograph thinks. It's pensive. The taking of the first photographs was an important event in the history of Iranian thought and consciousness. As the author of A Traveler's Narrative writes about the photograph of Mirza Badi, the image was worthy of contemplation. The photograph was an encounter of the nation with the image of itself that, unlike the mirror, did not take its word back, at least not with the passing of time. The photograph transformed the imaginal, what Kolban describes as the otherworldly world of the original image, and the metaphysical world, the veiled world of myth and religion that covered over the everyday, into a world of activity, of engagement, and of efforts in its transformation and its recreation. The photograph alerted consciousness to its constant dealings with the human body. It captured for Iran the everyday, the spatial, the temporal. In the course of centuries, writes one Iranian scholar, we have been successful in creating one of the most complicated cultures wherein none of the worldly questions of our everyday have been answered. It is the photograph, writes Walter Benjamin, with its time lapses, its enlargements, which make the knowledge of the everyday possible. Through these methods, one first learns of the optical unconscious, just as one learns of the drives from psychoanalysis. It is this link between the everyday details recovered by the momentary click of the camera and the psychoanalytic recovery of the unconscious of everyday life, which makes the observations regarding the presence of the image to conscious thought significant. It is this recovery of the quotidian detail that transforms perception and so also affects thought. Iranian hermeneutics, as you know, is based on the primacy of hiding core values, that is, veiling, or the batin, and of distrusting manifold meaning, that is, and of distrusting manifest meaning, that is, a distrust of vision, namely the zahir. As such, what veiling represents is embroiled in a wide variety of media and materials that articulate themselves in a diverse areas of modern cultural life in Iran. Let me use an example. The division of space and the construction of architecture in Iran are symptomatic of these cultural constructions of veiling and vision. Traditional homes have two distinct areas within which actions take place. The space known in Persian as biruni, or exterior, is the place where guests are received, and the andaruni, or the interior, is where the family, and in particular women, may carry on their lives without any interference. Outside of the home, this need for privacy is continued by means of veiling, where the chador functions as though the home itself, a tent, was somehow transported into the public sphere. So, linked to conceptions of interiority, notions of female privacy are both semantically and conceptually connected to the Islamic legal category of forbiddenness expressed through the Arabic root harama, or HRM. It is a complex root from which a wide range of words may be derived, words which indicate how spatial divisions may bear on built forms as directly as they do conceptual distinctions and rational practices. But to put this briefly, three things seem to join forces to develop the sense of the haram, which derives from this root: holiness, impurity, as with pork and wine, and sexual activity, and by extension women in whom heterosexual sex is invested. All three exist within conceptual spaces that mark them off from ordinary or everyday life. All define boundaries that may not be crossed, spatial and social and moral circles of inviolability. And not surprisingly then, the tradition of photography in Iran, with its roots in early personal photographs taken and collected by Nasiruddin Shah, and in the commercial photographs taken by Sever Green, there is a mark of a recovered or repressed haram in ordinary life. Photographs capture the everyday, but in doing so, they dissolve the stringent boundaries between public space, the public space of visibility, the biruni, and the private or sacred space of interiority, the andaruni. The photographs of everyday life bring the interior, pure, and holy spaces of women especially to the exterior realm of visibility. Nasiruddin Shah's prolific photographs of his harem, and I've only taken a few very modest ones to show you, adorned in their private outfits, immerse 19th century photographs into the realm of the haram, ironically revealing a realm of interiority beyond the veil of visibility. A curious latency in the photographic image discloses itself in a future moment to us, as though hidden in the folds of clothing, in shadows of objects, and poses adopted by the subjects of portraiture. It reveals itself not only in its contents, but also in the form of the photographically visual in the process of recording and imprinting. This next section is called The Hand, and I just wanted to point out the title of the section because we're going to see a lot of hands. If we return briefly to the passage on Mirza Badi in A Traveler's Narrative, we will note the degree to which the photograph and the commentary on it are configured by the unconscious tensions present in the history of photography. But here they come together in an abbreviated form. In his commentary, the narrator of A Traveler's Narrative states that in the photograph which he acquired after the execution of the young man Mirza Badi is seated in the center, with the executioner seated on the right and left. As we noted earlier, similar photographs of criminals emerged and were circulated in Iran as a means to warn, discipline, and instill fear in the Shah's subject under the reign of the Qajars. Yet the commentary around this photographic encounter emphasizes the inefficacy of this royal disciplinary gesture. The narrator's eyes rest on the photograph in order to contemplate the heroism and the integrity of the sword's victim, not his fear or feelings of remorse or his status as a criminal. Rather than embracing the intended discourse imposed by state law, Abdul Baha, the narrator, makes a commentary that challenges those who attempt to pose the subject of the photograph in terms that are destructive to the common good. The commentary similarly challenges the claims to documentation of visible reality and hence truth, which underwrite both the disciplining measures adopted by the Shah through photography and the tradition of distance and objectivity in foreign travelers' textual and visual accounts of 19th century Iran, a tradition to which the narrative's own labor is admittedly based. As such, the commentary configures a critique that derives its force from the specificity of a reading of the photograph, which I call anti-disciplinary. It looks at the photograph as an anti-disciplinary object, an object that not only shows a moment past, but also thinks its future evolutions and its fields of influence, and its future fields of influence. In other words, it cannot be contained by one way of thinking alone. It shatters all boundaries. While the commentary challenges the disciplinary measures ascribed to the photograph by the royal court and undercuts the then present tradition of scientific objectivity attributed to photography, especially in disciplinary discourses of its contemporaries, the photograph itself embraces another irony on the level of content. With fetters around his neck and feet, the young man rests his left hand on the chain. Not unlike the first photographs of Nasruddin Shah taken by his own camera, this victim stares directly at the lens. It's not the direct look, mind you, but the hand that is remarkable. Mirza Badi's hand placement in this photograph is reminiscent of a time in early Western traditions of photography when it was necessary to give models support so that they would remain steady for the duration of the exposure in photo ateliers. Models stood with their fingers braced in their jacket buttons to hold still. And in these early photographs, columns appeared next to drapes and awkwardly standing on rugs. framing the photographs of the servants of the interior court, foreign settings produced by studio mats, attested to a universal perception. Photography was seen as an opportunity to become other. Photography was not necessarily a means by which we could capture the spirit or the ghost of the subject of portraiture, as some also thought. It was rather a means by which we could create other histories, reveal other selves, other truths. In a gesture that consigned to photography the opportunity to live spectrally, servants and eunuchs put on costumes and straw hats in the inner court. In these photographs, courtiers made themselves look like women, and hedgehogs and flower pots. They articulated in the transformations they effected through the new technology of photography the old forms retrieved by Sheikh Abu Turab in his recollection of the events in Badasht, in ways that his recollections could only begin to surmise. Mirza Badi's hand gesture, a traditional sign of humility in Iranian culture, like the polite raising of the hat on 19th century Manhattan promenades, awkwardly replicates Western traditions of photography. One has to wonder if this gesture, like Nasiruddin Shah's top hat and imported chair in his own court photographs, was not inherited from early Western styles of photographic portraiture, namely putting the hand into the coat. A gesture shaped in the context of modern Western technological development and remembered and mimicked to the last moment of one's life. In an uncanny current of antagonistic articulation, and thus linked to the veiled condition of interiority, the batin, Mirza Badi's photograph externalizes a gesture with its connotation of interior integrity to the visual and exterior world of the Zahir. And it does so through the exposure of the abject subject to technological advances in photography. Badi's youthful hand gesture is a photographic index buried for decades and directing the vision of its reader looking back. It instructs us in an anti-disciplinary practice. It is through the specificity of this reading practice that Abdul Baha himself forwarded a critique of state and a lesson that redirects our vision to see in the long past moment a future which our era can only begin to surmise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mottahedeh, for a fascinating subject and lecture.
Thank you.
And it's indeed, as somebody who actually does research on the Qajar period, it's one of the new and novel fields in the history of Qajar period in general, and as I said, of Baha'i studies also in particular. Yes, we will take questions, a few questions if there is any. I wanted to ask you, I mean, you analyzed from the with the theoretical knowledge and tools that we have today, these photographs. Do we know for what means they were taken at the Qajar period itself? I mean, for example, the family ones, the royal family. I understand it were more for private use.
Yeah.
But for example, pictures like those, I think you said that they were published, and they were in order to kind of prevent others to commit
crimes.
where they were published?
They were circulated as pamphlets, posters.
Okay, okay.
Around.
I didn't see.
This one, but the photographs in Nasiruddin Shah's collection were mainly for his private use,
yes.
and it was a way for him to collect modernity. Essentially, he collected photographs of European women and European royals, and
There wasn't any kind of historical thought behind this. I mean, this will be proved. Because Nasiruddin Shah, he has went through different phases.
yeah.
When they, for example, introduced the telegraph, he was just a new Shah, and at the time it was a tool for his own amusement, according to the records that there is. But then later he understood the importance of it, and so and then he attached a lot of importance to the extension of the telegraph throughout his empire. Is there any such, I would say, understanding of the photography? First, maybe for his own, not only himself. I mean, we can also ask this regarding other later Qajar monarchs. I mean, is there any from your research?
Well, photography was a very important field in Iran. Just as the Polytechnic was being established, it was taught under chemistry. They brought foreign chemists
Yes.
to come to Iran, foreign scientists to come to Iran and train Iranians in the science of chemistry, and under that was where they taught photography. So I think that there is a lot of things that people say about Nasiruddin Shah that belittle him in effect, and he was actually pursuing a science, and he was very interested in actually developing nativist methods of developing photographs, like coming up with chemical solutions that would do other things with photography.
Is there any, for your study, what kind of sources you use? I mean, there's his private memoirs, or, in order to go into this specific subject.
Yeah. Well, there are moments in his travel logs where he talks about photography, and also there are notes that he has with the photo collection. So those are the kinds of things that I look at.
Yes, Sharon.
I just wanted to ask, because coming from not from Middle East studies,
Yes.
completely out of the field. These two sets of pictures, sets of these public pictures of people who are perhaps to be executed and
Yeah.
punished and therefore made into postcards and given out. And on the other hand, the private photographs of the home, of the wives, of the possessions, of the eunuchs, whatever. In many ways, there is a Western parallel to these pictures, because for example, I think most people know this from Westerns. Bandits or outlaws, when they were dead, usually after they were shot, they were usually put in their coffins, and the coffin was raised, and the photograph would be taken of them, published in the newspapers and things like that. And in earlier times, when it wasn't the photograph, it was actually the accused last dying statement, which then would be published on a pamphlet, 2-page pamphlet. It was just like a 2-sided piece of paper, and then sold.
So
Again, for very much the same purposes, to say both moral and criminal. Don't do this. This person was a murderer. Look what happened to him. And
Kind of like the tombstone ads,
yes,
right?
yes.
The man's dying statement.
Yes,
Pizza.
exactly. This is what you have here.
Yes.
A last dying statement. And on the other hand, these private pictures, which come out from a very different tradition, which is cataloging your possessions. This is, Browning's poem, My Last Duchess. This is the picture of my last Duchess. I had her painted, merchants painting their possessions in the house, or princes displaying their empire, basically metaphorically, because of the map and the globe and various objects from the colonies which are now portrayed with the monarch.
Right.
What they have come here. What are they serving here? I mean, here in the convicts pictures, I can understand. It's a very clear thing. But in the other set of pictures, what is going on there?
Yeah.
In the women's pictures, because very often in the late 19th century, especially, society ladies the beauties would be photographed, and much to their dismay and horror, they were put without their permission on postcards, and their pictures were sold. So the Duchess of, I don't know, so-and-so suddenly found her picture photographed, distributed to the masses. Now, this is not what's happening here, from what I understand. It's a private collection. What's he using it for?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that it is just for collection purposes. But what's interesting about,
I mean, this one in particular, this is amazing.
I mean, many of them are of them dressed in their finery and kind of lying on fainting couches and relaxing.
So this is almost like an odalisque,
Very much like that. But it's interesting because photographs of the same period in Europe, women are not in their finery. They are in work clothes. They are working out in the streets of Paris, for example, driving horses with hats and all that. So you can't even say that what he's doing is
contemporary.
Yes.
This is much earlier.
Yeah, but maybe the act of collection is contemporary. I mean, I think we can answer that whether if we can know, for example, the first photographs of the harems of the women. If they have taken place after 1873, it means that it's after his first tour to Europe.
Yes.
Then it might be that he was impressed. Yes, he might be impressed of this having collection, and of course he takes pictures of the women in the Iranian context, not with the hat.
Victorian about this collection.
Well, actually, he takes a photograph of Mahdolia, which is she dies before his European trip. So we know that he took photographs of the women before he actually went.
So maybe this was.
Many people actually say that. I'm sorry, I keep pointing this way, but it's that way. Many people say, well, he went to the ballet. And he looked at the tutus, and then he copied that and brought it to Iran. But in fact, tutus weren't around by 1870s yet, and he wasn't that impressed with the ballet. And these are just shorter version of the earlier dress that we saw, for example, on Mahdolia in this photograph. Oops. So
maybe the Dar al-Funun from there. I mean, because of the chemistry and the photograph there. So he used to attend the Dar al-Funun every day. So maybe he was impressed with this technique. And I mean, could have different reason for different. For his mother, probably wanted to keep her photo.
Thank you. I was very taken by your comparison of Sheikh Abu Turab's description of the unveiling at Badash and the gentleman who cut his throat and ran out. The comparison with the Surah 12 of the Quran. And again, this question, like the last questions, are from outside the humanities. I'm coming at it from more of a science background. So the question may seem obtuse, but I was asking myself as I was hearing you describe this, how do we know that Sheikh Abu Turab was not simply describing what he saw, and that this layering in of the significance of it and the allusion to the Quran and all of that, how do we know that's not us superimposing what to him was simply a straight recollection of what happened?
Many different things. I mean, first of all, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. It could very well have happened. it could very well have not happened. What I know is that chroniclers of that period have a hard time saying what happened. A couple of reasons for that. They, if a guy said he saw a woman unveiled, he would be implicated in that act. He would be implicated in the abjection of it. If he said she was unveiled and she was her supporter, he would have to explain how she was the pure one. How does she remain? How come she received the title Tahedeh, the pure one? So chroniclers of the period say, oh yeah, well, her veil kind of fell. Or they say something revealed, the kernel opened up and something revealed itself. This is in Nuqtatul Kaf. It's like they can't say it, so they just dance around it. He is actually, his recollection is, I believe, the first one, which comes much later, where someone actually comes out straight out and says, well, she appeared unveiled and this guy cut his throat. The reference to the banquet scene, this detail in the Quran, purifies the scene. In other words, and it's not a rare instance in modernity where we in modern culture return to an archaic form in order to describe what we have never seen before, what we cannot describe. An unpresentable woman, right, is here, and we are calling her the pure one. And she is ushering forth an era of modernity in our time. She is saying we're still part of the past, and yet we are the future. What do you do with this? So the way to go about it, I mean, this is just me. The way we go about it, the way we went about it as moderns, was to refer to old forms, archaic, buried forms, and retrieve them and create modern things. Just think about, let's see, the first light bulb is shaped in the form of a flame. We talk about horsepower. I mean, these are all examples in culture of how we went to old forms. Ironwork comes in shapes of trees and branches and leaves and so there is this impulse to go to the ur form in order to produce the newest, the new day.
It's our impulse. It's not. Was it the narrator's impulse, or is it our impulse to do it sort of after the fact? That's open,
but I think that he was modern. I mean, that's the thing. He was one of the moderns, and it's important to notice. I just selected one instance. It's important to notice what his contemporaries were doing. They were going to the old traditions of Muharram traditions of depicting Judgment Day as you know, the Karbala event, right? And they were saying, you know, that the fields in which the Babis were fighting were the fields of Karbala, right? And Mullah Hussein was Imam Hussein, right? And so and the Bab is the Qaim. So it's this retrieving of an old form in order to describe the new moment, because the words for the present, for an unseen present, are not available, or the images anyway. I think one of the points that I was making about the anti-disciplinarity of the image is that is that many of the Babis, many of the things that happened in the period of the Babis, were ways, were lessons for us to burst the confines of disciplinarity, the ways that we have thought in terms science, history, geography, the way that we have separated out fields, and to think creatively of how the object is affecting and bursting those fields, and showing us new ways of approaching it. And so I take my lesson from that. I take my lesson from this moment in Badash where the participants are taking on new names, changing the direction of their prayer, selecting a new qibla, which is actually in Iran, making the holy script Farsi, Persian, and not Farsi, but Persian, rather than Arabic, changing their holy book to a new holy book. The Bab himself deciding that no matter what the theologian says, he is going to speak his kind of Arabic, his grammatical use of Arabic. They can make fun of him, but he's going to do it. There are instances of anti-disciplinarity here that show us ways to rethink our work through them in looking back. And this photograph, I thought, was sort of a distilled version of all of these instances of anti-disciplinarity, which then Abdul Baha, some 40 years later, looks at and says, there he is doing it again. There they are doing it again. And my question to us as researchers of the Middle East and other kinds of researchers is, what is our lesson from this anti-disciplinarity?
Any more? If not, I would like to conclude with another question. I don't know whether you touch upon this, but in the field of, in the general field of modernization, introducing modernization into Iran, reform, whether it is from the intellectual side or practical side, the Baha'is were in the forefront, at the forefront. If you take the field after photography, which is more of the cinema, we have this Ibrahim Khan Akaswashi of Muzaffar Shah, who is in certain accounts written that he was a Baha'i. I'm not. We have this Nasrullah Bagherov, or Sadaq Khamsi before, and then became Khamsi, who built the Grand Hotel, and within it the biggest cinema in Tehran in the early 20th century. Do we know of Baha'is being involved in the field of photography, or this is something that there is no material, or
Let's see.
in promoting photography in Iran?
Promoting photography.
Yes.
That I know of, I have not come across them yet.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that they're not
sure,
in the
of
history,
course,
and
yes.
I think that would be an interesting thing. Although I want to say that that more and more, I think that in my studies, I want to focus on how this was a Iranian culture in the 19th century, as it is today, as a heterogeneous culture, and that in thinking about the admixture of cultures, ethnicities, religions, etc., in Iran at that time, helps us rethink also our present, which is being more and more as Iran has grown into the Islamic Republic, becoming seen as an Islamic culture total. I mean, there is a process of let's say purification going on that denies the fact that Iran has always been a hybrid of sorts and continues to be that. And so I work very hard in my studies to integrate rather than distill.
Thank you very much, and I thank you again for coming up
thank
here.
you so much. It's such an honor.
And I should thank also Dr. Hoda Mahmoudi and the Baha'i World Center for cooperating in running this very interesting series. And see you Sunday.
Yes.
Hopefully. Thank you very much. You
you
are
so
all
much.
invited for Sunday for another lecture of Dr. Mottahedeh regarding the Iranian cinema today, not 19th century photography.
Islamic
You have perspective.
cyborgs.
Cyborg, yes.
Cyborg. That's a good name.
Yes.